we're still in program mode. We are only focusing on one element of our exposure triangle, ISO. Yay, yay, yay. So what is exposure though? I had mentioned in the exercise video, and you've already seen this slide before with module 1. Exposure is referring to the amount of light that your camera sensor is collecting and the resulting density of your image. So whether or not it is too light or too dark. We just saw when I was doing those quick edits with my exercise series that a lot of them were a little bit on the darker side. So I had to increase that brightness. And that's totally fine because we're going to talk about why that was happening when we switched to manual mode. There are 4 factors that affect exposure. So one, just the amount of light in the scene. As I've been talking about our activities the past few weeks, photography's medium is light. So obviously it's necessary for it to be a factor. We have ISO, which we've been exploring, aperture, and shutter speed. The reason why I am isolating ISO right now is because the rest of our exposure triangle components are depending upon the ISO we set within our cameras. We're talking about the sensitivity to light, how fast or the rate, both of those are interchangeable words, at which your camera sensor is responding to the light. We have this term stops. Again, we're going to go more into that when we get into manual mode, but it is referring to the relative change in exposure to light by altering aperture, shutter speed, or ISO. So that relative change in exposure will either increase, decrease, or maintain our density, lightness and darkness of our image. So when we were actually moving through our entire series for ISO with our whole stops, so you see the whole stops we were working with down here, by moving that ISO setting and having the camera in program mode where the aperture and shutter speed were changing automatically on their own, we were able to maintain that brightness, which is why we were able to really see how the image quality was being affected in that same lighting situation. All that being said, you do have particular ISO settings for particular lighting situations. So with our low ISOs, some people who are using their personal cameras, you might have, and your camera might go as low as ISO 50. If your cameras, if you're not seeing it within them, literally don't worry about it. It all just depends upon how old the camera is. When we have ISO 50, if you have it, ISO 100, 200, those are going to be less sensitive to light, meaning it's going to capture less light. So it's going to need a lot of light. Your camera sensor, it's going to need to collect a lot of light in order to produce an image. Even though that sounds like a little annoying, the trade-off with that is you're going to have less image noise. Now we have our special ISO of 400. ISO 400 is the best of both worlds. With this ISO, you can have it in bright lighting conditions to more dim and dark lighting conditions, and still create really strong exposures while maintaining that image quality. Anything above ISO 400, so going to 800, 1600, 3200, these are going to be more sensitive to light. It's going to be able to capture more light quickly at a faster rate. But with that, since it is really, really quick at responding to light, it's going to make more noise within your image. If you refer back to that Camera Basics YouTube video, it was comparing the camera sensor and ISO settings to microphones. And with microphones or just sound in general, as you increase the volume, increasing the gain of it, you can kind of hear a lot more audio defects that would be happening within it. That's the same idea that's happening within our higher ISO settings. When it comes to exposure, ISO therefore still affects the brightness or darkness of an image. So here we have a different series showing how the ISO was changing and not aperture and shutter speed. And with that, we see how our lower ISO of 100 here is significantly darker than our ISO of 800 on the right-hand side. On these next two slides, I have this table showing the whole stop ISOs, where it's lying on the sensitivity of our camera sensor, the lighting requirements, and what particular subjects they are good for, and then talking about the visual qualities, what to expect out of it. This handout is also up on D2L for you if you want to download it as far as a cheat sheet for you as you move about the rest of the semester. Again, ISO 50 to 100, we have those direct sun lighting conditions that is going to be best for them. Direct sun or just very, very bright light in general. When we have our ISO 200, this is where our camera sensor sensitivity is low to medium. Here we can still do very bright light conditions. We can kind of get a little bit into shadows depending upon what kind of shadows they are. And then now as we move to 400 and above, 400 again is that best of both worlds, known as like general purpose ISO. It's good in fluctuating light. If you were to ever take an intro to darkroom class, which I highly recommend, every class at every school, you start off with an ISO 400 just because of how versatile it is. And then now 800 somewhat dark, 1600 somewhat dark, 3200 more dimly lit. So this is when you can start photographing, like if you were in your house in the evening or even doing some night photography. This is what you would use for. Now, people like using higher ISOs, especially in the beginning of our class, because when it comes to exposures, we can talk about how quick an can be, how long it can take to actually capture the amount of light necessary to create an image. So like I said, the three components of our exposure triangle, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, all work together to figure out how much light we want to let into the camera. Now, when I'm talking about how fast or quick, whatever an exposure is, That is referring to shutter speed. I'm going to give a quick definition about it because there's one thing you need to keep in mind for the shooting assignment for Light and Form. So shutter speed refers to the amount of time that the light is coming through your camera's lens and hitting the sensor. When we have lower ISO values, if you're using them in a dimmer, darker lighting situation, what's going to happen is instead of it being a quick push of a button, that shutter is going to stay open longer. So instead of it being like a fraction of a second, like 1/1000th, it can be a half second, full second, can go into tens of seconds, minutes, etc., etc. People get pretty impatient with how long it can take for the camera to collect light in a darker lighting situation when using the lower ISOs, which is why people go to our higher ISOs because it's quicker, because the sensitivity to light is extremely high and the camera's shutter doesn't need to be pushed in order to let in more light than what it was doing in the lower ISOs. So people love it because it's can be a quick snap and then they can move on with their day. But again, that is degrading that image quality. What you want to do is you are going to want to maintain it. So when you are switching your ISOs for this assignment, I don't recommend going above ISO 400 or even 800 because as again, you can see on the right-hand side, we're really losing detail. We are losing detail in the colors. There's some banding. There's that sandy texture. It's not too hot. When we are keeping it lower, our camera, again, is choosing the shutter speed for us. So it's automatically going to be reading the amount of light that's coming through our lens, and it will be choosing a shutter speed that takes more time to let light in through the lens. That's just going to be the name of the game, and you got to learn to be patient with it because the reward is worth it as far as having these rich colors and these nice textures and clarity happening within your image. Now, when we use shutter speeds that take more time to capture light, what we want to make sure we use is a tripod. Tripod should have been used for your exercise because that helps to A, maintain composition, and B, maintain focus. Now, if you don't use a tripod in a dimmer lighting condition and you have those shutter speeds that take more time, what's going to happen is you are going to see this thing called camera shake. Camera shake. When you are looking through the viewfinder and you are focusing your image, it's going to look like it's in focus, right? Because what's happening is whatever you're seeing in the viewfinder hasn't been actually captured on your camera sensor yet. When you take a photograph with these longer shutter speeds, even the simple act of pushing the button down or hand holding the camera, even if you think you have very steady hands, there's going to be a little bit of movement no matter what. So when you think your image is in focus, like what's happening with the bottom part of our image here with the eyes, it's going to end up actually looking like the top portion of our image where everything is slightly off. Now, the degree of camera shake just depends upon one, the shooting condition you're in, also how long your shutter is taking to collect the amount of light within the lens coming through your camera sensor. So It might seem like when you look at that preview right away that things are in focus, but if you use those playback buttons and you really zoom in, which you should be doing anyway, because you always want to make sure that your image is in focus in the areas that you meant for it to be in, you can tell if camera shake was happening or not. Recommend it not just because of the potential of camera shake, but maybe your eyes aren't as good as you think they are, or they aren't. Because depending upon what you're taking a photograph of, if it's a moving object or even a stationary object, conditions change all the time whenever you are approaching your subject, unless you are doing an extremely controlled photo shoot. And with that, you might not have the opportunity to take a photograph of that subject again. Or if you do, the conditions might be different than what you were wanting to work with originally. So always take that extra step to slow down, work with your playback button, and zoom in really close to your images so that you can double check that everything is in focus. Heavy emphasis. For this assignment, since you do not control your shutter speed, you are working with your lower ISOs. I do encourage you to photograph in those dimmer, moodier lighting situations because that's the whole point of our light and form shooting assignment is just to see how light is working within the scene. Have a tripod. You're going to be so much happier with your images because they're going to be in focus. You are going to prevent using those higher ISO settings, and therefore you're going to be maintaining your image quality.